The Crow and the Oyster. One day, a hungry crow saw an oyster on the beach. He wanted to eat the tasty meal inside the shell. So he tried to open the oyster.
The Crow and the Oyster. One day, a hungry crow saw an oyster on the beach. He wanted to eat the tasty meal inside the shell. So he tried to open the oyster.
Of course, he used his beak, but he could not open the shell. Then he hit it with a stone, but the shell stayed tightly shut. He even jumped up and down on the oyster, but still he could not open it.
First, he used his beak, but he could not open the shell. Then he hit it with a stone, but the shell stayed tightly shut. He even jumped up and down on the oyster, but still he could not open it.
Then another crafty crow came by. He saw what the first crow was trying to do and said, "My friends, may I offer you some good advice? I suggest you picked up the oyster in your beak, fly high into the air, and then dropped the oyster onto the rock below. The oyster shell will break open and you will be able to have your meal."
Then another crafty crow came by. He saw what the first crow has and was trying to do and said, "My friend, may I offer you some good advice? I suggest you pick up the oyster in your beak, fly high into the air, and then drop the oyster onto the rock below. The oyster shell will break open, and you will be able to have your meal."
The hungry crow thought that it was a very good idea. He picked up the oyster with his beak and then he flew as high as he could. When he was sure that he was high enough, he dropped the oyster onto the rock far below.
The hungry crow thought that this was a good idea. The hungry crow thought that this was a very good idea. He picked up the oyster with his beak and then he flew as high as he could. When he was sure that he was high enough, he dropped the oyster onto the rock far below.
The oyster shell broke wide open. However, the crafty crow was waiting behind the rock nearby and he reached the broken oyster first. He enjoyed a tasty meal while the hungry crow had nothing to eat.
The oyster shells broke wide open. However, the crafty crow was waiting behind the rock nearby and he reached the broken oyster first. He enjoyed the meal while the hungry crow had nothing to eat.